Every city has its stories, its secrets, and its quiet heroes. But sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that go unnoticed. The small acts of love, the silent moments of hope, the loyalty that can't be explained. In a busy hospital, surrounded by the hum of machines and the bustle of doctors and nurses, a little puppy waits. He isn't lost. He isn't scared. He isn't seeking food or shelter. This puppy is waiting for something, or rather, someone. His name is Buddy. But for everyone who crosses his path, he is simply the puppy who never leaves the hospital, the little dog who always sits at the same spot, his eyes fixed on the hospital doors. Day after day, night after night, Buddy waits. But who is he waiting for? What is it that keeps this tiny puppy sitting quietly in the cold, rain, and wind, as if he's expecting someone to walk through those doors and take him home again? This is the story of Buddy, a puppy who has known nothing but love and loyalty, and the surprising way he touched the hearts of all those around him. Buddy's daily routine is as simple as it is heart-wrenching. Every morning, the sun rises, and the world wakes up. Yet Buddy is already there, curled up in his familiar spot near the hospital's entrance. It's a peaceful spot, away from the busy roads, yet close enough to feel the hustle of the city. The sound of people talking, the cars passing by, the ambulances arriving, it's all part of his world. But it's the hospital doors he watches most intently, as if he's waiting for something, or someone, to walk out. Visitors to the hospital often notice him. Some stop to pet him, others give him scraps of food. A few even try to coax him into playing, but Buddy is always polite, never too eager and never too excitable. He takes what's offered, then returns to his vigil. His eyes stay fixed on the doors. The hospital staff have come to know him well. There's Nurse Emma, who has a soft spot for the little dog. She sometimes brings him food after her shift, and she's noticed that Buddy seems to recognize the sound of her footsteps. Then there's security guard Ravi, who smiles at Buddy every night as he walks by. But no one knows where he came from, and no one has any answers as to why he's always here. Some of the nurses talk to him as they pass. "Hey, Buddy, how's it going today?" Nurse Sarah says one morning, kneeling down to give him a quick scratch behind the ears. "Still waiting for your person?" Buddy wags his tail, but his gaze never leaves the hospital doors. It's almost as if he understands everything she says, but knows that the answer to her question is something only he can understand. People passing by might think it's just a dog. They might think he's simply hanging around looking for food, but for those who've spent a little time observing Buddy, there's a sense that something much deeper is going on. Dr. Thomas is a busy man. He's seen his fair share of patients, dealt with emergencies, and saved lives. But he's also noticed Buddy, the little puppy who never seems to leave. At first, Dr. Thomas just thought Buddy was a stray. There are so many of them in the city after all. But the more he saw Buddy sitting by the hospital, always so still, so patient, the more intrigued he became. One night, after a long shift, Dr. Thomas finds himself walking down the corridor toward the hospital entrance. The night is cold, and a light rain is falling. He's exhausted, but something compels him to look outside as he passes the door. And there he is, Buddy, sitting quietly by the entrance, just as always. Dr. Thomas has been working long hours and hasn't had much of a chance to notice Buddy up close, but tonight is different. He stands by the door for a moment watching the little puppy. There's something about him, something that Dr. Thomas begins asking around the hospital. He speaks to nurses, security guards, janitors, anyone who might know anything about Buddy. But no one seems to know much about him. "Has anyone seen where he came from?" Dr. Thomas asks a nurse one morning. "Does he belong to someone?" The nurse shakes her head. "I don't know. He's been here for as long as I've worked here. I think he's just waiting for someone. But who? That's the mystery." The mystery deepens when Dr. Thomas speaks to a local vendor who sells coffee outside the hospital. The vendor tells him that Buddy has been coming to the hospital for months. He always sits in the same spot, always looks at the same doors. He's been here for a long time, the vendor says. I think he's waiting for someone to come out, someone important to him. But who knows? Maybe he's just a stray. But Dr. Thomas knows that Buddy isn't just a stray. There's something about the dog that's different, something that feels like more than just an animal looking for scraps of food. One cold winter night, Dr. Thomas decides to follow Buddy. After his shift ends, he watches as Buddy gets up and begins to walk down the street, just like he does every night. The doctor follows quietly, staying a few paces behind. Buddy walks slowly, his head down, his tail swaying gently. He turns a corner, and Dr. Thomas follows him, his heart pounding. The dog leads him down a quiet alleyway, far from the hustle and bustle of the hospital. Eventually, Buddy stops in front of an abandoned building, a rundown corner where the pavement is cracked and the windows are boarded up. It's here that Dr. Thomas sees something that breaks his heart. A pile of old clothes, a blanket, and a few personal belongings. Dr. Thomas realizes the truth. This is where Buddy's owner must have lived. The man who had been with Buddy all this time, the one Buddy is still waiting for. The next day, Dr. Thomas speaks to some of the locals who live near the hospital. Slowly, the pieces of the story start to fall into place. Buddy's owner was a homeless man who had been seen outside the hospital with his dog for months. He was a quiet, kind man who always looked after Buddy, sharing whatever little food they had. But one day, the man became ill. He was brought into the hospital, and though the doctors did their best to help him, he passed away. And Buddy? He's been waiting outside ever since, not understanding that his best